Last week, we reviewed how to respond to question 2, Analyzing Language, on Language Paper 1. In this feedback lesson, we'll be revisiting the key devices from the segment we looked at last week. We'll be revisiting the question 2 mark scheme, and we will also go over some sample answers. For each of the questions on Language Paper 1 and 2, you need to make sure that you're highlighting the key words. So if we look at this particular question, look again at the following paragraph. How does the writer use language here to describe the fire and its effects on Montag? So you can see the keywords have been highlighted, and you'll need to make sure that you focus on those keywords and mention them in your response, okay? I'm just going to take a moment to read through this particular part of the extract, and also remember for question 2 on Language Paper 1 that the question will ask you typically how language is used to either describe a character or how language is used to describe the setting. And this particular question asks you elements of both, so you need to make sure that you incorporate both of those things in your response. With the brass nozzle in his fists, with his great python spinning its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounded in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal of history. With his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame, with the thought of what came next, he flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted, above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow on a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-wing books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Okay, so you can see that different devices have been highlighted that relate to the question. Take a minute or two now and see if you can identify any of these devices without referring to your notes. Okay, so if you recall from the lesson last week, we've looked at some particular devices for different ideas with regards to how Montag feels about the fire and how the fire is depicted. So here we see the semantic field of power and authority. Montag feels empowered and skilled in his job. We have the metaphor, the amazing conductor, which evokes notions of responsibility and control. All the symphonies is hyperbolic, and it emphasizes the magnitude of his task and the pride he takes. The symphonies of blazing and burning, you have synesthesia, the sort of mixing of senses, and there's a suggestion he believes he's creating something beautiful. You could also talk about the plosive of blazing and burning, sort of mimicking the sounds of the fire. Okay, here we're looking in particular at personification. The house jumped up, the fire dominates and destroys the building. You could also look at that phrase, jumped up, this idea that there's something sort of frightening, and you want to think about the fact that if there is a house, that probably people inhabit that house, and so not only are books being destroyed, but also people are in danger. You have the dynamic verb gorging, and there's a sense that the fire is greedy, insatiable, and it's looking for more things to destroy. You have the semantic field of color or color imagery, which indicates anger, but also danger, decay, destruction, this sense of corruption, okay? Okay, and then now we're sort of looking at the after effects of the fire. So you have the sparkling whirls, so you have imagery of beauty and value. There's a strange beauty to be found in the burning of the books, and it indicates the pleasure that Montag takes in watching the fire. You can think back to the idea of those symphonies. So he believes that he's creating something beautiful, which is sort of quite perverse, really, when you consider that what he's doing is destroying things. The whirls and wind, and you've got the sort of alliterative W, again, maybe mimicking the motion of the wind, the pathetic fallacy there, the winds of change. So there's the danger of transformation. There's a shift that's coming. Montag's job and his way of life is perhaps set to change. So you've got those particular devices there. Okay, so now we're going to look at 3 model paragraphs. Remember for question 2 that you want to make sure that you write 2 to 3 Peel paragraphs. It's actually better to do 2 that are really in depth than 3 that are sort of less developed, okay? Remember that the effect drives the grade, but you still want to make sure that you're really focusing on sophisticated devices and identifying as many as you can. In terms of the mark scheme, the 3 things that the examiner is looking for are quotes, including micro quotes. You need to zoom in on words. It's a language question, so you really want to be looking carefully at individual words. The particular devices, and again, you really need to identify more than 1 per paragraph. At the very least, you should be identifying a language device and then talking about a particular word type and the effects on the reader. In order to get top marks, you need to be either perceptive or developed. So the more that you can say in terms of those effects, obviously the higher the mark you'll get. So first I'm going to read through this example, and then as we go through, you'll see that different areas in the mark scheme have been highlighted, so you can see exactly where they're represented. The writer uses an extended metaphor to present the starting of the fires as something that thrills and excites Montag. The writer describes the gas hose as a great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world. The comparison of the hose to a python could evoke notions of hell and the devil, suggesting that the fire and by extension Montag are malevolent forces of evil, further reinforced by the adjective venomous, which has connotations of something poisonous and deadly. The sibilant use of the onomatopoeic verb spitting, which could convey disrespect, develops the description of the snake, and along with its and venomous, you could also say kerosene, mimics the sinister sound of the snake. The hyperbolic use of the adjective great, along with the prepositional phrase upon the world, emphasizes the scope and size of the power as well as its destructive capability. Okay, so you can see here that the phrases that are in sort of the light blue are the devices that have been used. And I think we've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 devices mentioned, some of which sort of again focus more on word type and some of which are language devices, okay? The green are those quotations, and all of those sort of quotations are taken, or sort of the micro quotations are taken from the one slightly longer quotation. Please also notice that the quotations are embedded, so they're not just shoved in, they work and fit with the sentence, okay? And then obviously the effects are what's in yellow, okay? They should be specific and not vague, okay? So we're going to go through 2 more example paragraphs and then you'll want to have a look at your own. Furthermore, Bradbury uses personification to illustrate the power of the fire, separate and independent from Montag. When the house jumped up as the gorging fire burned, Bradbury demonstrates the violent power of the fire, able to move entire buildings. The use of the noun house also indicates the danger that the fire poses to people, although Montag shows an absence of concern. The verb phrase jumped up is also evocative of fear and could imply that other people living in this dystopian world are frightened of the damaging effects of the fire, even if Montag is not. The dynamic verb gorging evokes notions of monstrosity and highlights the insatiable appetite of the fire, suggesting that the fire itself cannot be satisfied, stopped, or controlled. The immensity of the effects of the fire are contrasted with the lack of effort it takes to ignite the fire, as Montag simply flicked the igniter. Okay. When you move on to your next paragraph, make sure you're not repeating yourself and making the same points. And also, obviously, the use of discourse markers add in sophistication. So if you say firstly, furthermore, and finally, if you're writing 3 paragraphs, that is something that the examiner will notice, even if they're not awarding marks for that. So make sure it's as clear as possible for the examiner. Finally, Bradbury uses the imagery of beauty and value to depict the after effects of the fire and Montag's appreciation of it. The books disintegrate into sparkling whirls, which suggest Montag's perverse joy at watching the remnants of the books as they float insubstantial in the wind. The descriptive adjective sparkling has connotations of quality and conveys the sense the book's value exists only in their demolition, at least from Montag's perspective. The worlds are blown away on wind. The use of the pathetic fallacy could signify a sudden shift or change in the dystopian world Montag inhabits. Okay, you can see that use of dystopian, and obviously, we let you know that it was a dystopian novel, but there will be, when you look at the language paper, they give you a little bit of information about where the text has been taken from, the type of text. So you can certainly refer to the genre and show that you have an understanding of the genre. Again, you have the use of discourse markers, so make sure you are doing that as well. Okay. Okay, so now what you need to do is you need to have a look through the paragraphs that you wrote, and you need to identify where you've met the mark scheme. Okay, so when you've used quotes, you can write a Q. Where you've identified devices, then you need to use a D, and where you've commented on the effect on the reader, then you need to use an E. Okay, make sure as you're going through the types of things that you want to look for, make sure that you're identifying several devices in each paragraph, really a minimum of 2. Make sure that in each paragraph you have one quotation, not overly long, and that you're then zooming in at least on one word. You can certainly look at multiple words from one quotation, as you've seen in the examples, because it is language analysis. So the more you can say about the language used, those individual words, the more you'll develop your response. Make sure that your effects are not vague. Okay, creates tension, creates a clear picture, it's a good effect. The more simplistic they are, the less likely you're to get those, into band 3, 6 out of 8, into band 4, that 8 out of 8, okay? So it needs to be clear. You then need to identify a target. So are you struggling with the devices? Are you struggling to use micro quotes? And if you've only used one, you might want to consider a second. Are you commenting on multiple effects? Because remember, to get full marks, you need to develop your response, okay? So after you've taken a moment to go through your paragraphs and identify where you hit the mark scheme, you need to give yourself a target. Once you've given yourself a target, I'd like you to take 10 minutes, use the example paragraphs, go back and see what kind of additions you can make in red pen.